To the Parcel Fabric Meetup. It's 9:30. Let's get started. Today we're going to cover more about using attribute rules with the Parcel Fabric. Some of the topics include attribute rules that were shipped with ArcGIS Pro 2.7, publishing and evaluating the attribute rules, and some new arcade capabilities in 2.7, plus I'm sure there's going to be more. Also, we have a guest presenter today, John McDowell from Clackamas County, Oregon. John has been with Clackamas County for 22 years as a senior information software specialist and also has been working over 25 years with land records and GIS. And John is also part of the ORMAP group. Today, he's going to share with us how he has implemented attribute rules to transfer values from one feature to another. Just a few notes. There is a link on the Meetup site where you can download a project package that contains sample data. And then go ahead and please put your comments and questions in the questions section of this meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, John.
All right, thank you. Let's get going here. So I've been actually looking at this migration from Rmap to ArcGIS Pro for over 2.5 years. And part of that is looking at how I can take some functionality that ORMAP has developed for maintaining parcels and attribute qualities. So first, a little background on what ORMAP is. ORMAP is a state initiative the state of Oregon has put together. The goal is to create a cadastral-based map of the entire state that's publicly accessible, continually maintained, that supports our Oregon property tax system, supports a multi-purpose land information system, strives to comply with appropriate state and national standards, and will continue to be improved over time. If you want to learn more, go to www.ormap.net. What's nice is there's actually a web app. You can get in there and you can look at all the parcels in the state of Oregon and retrieve assessor maps. And ORMAP, its primary goal is to create a precise statewide parcel layer and to be able to facilitate map production. Maps are very important to our assessment offices, and a lot of our workflows in maintenance is to put out a assessor's map or publish an assessor's map. Now, we do have an existing ORMAP data model, and we have a set of tools that we developed against them. We developed these tools back in the 20aughts. The data model that a lot of us are using was finally published in 2006, 2007. It has a Platts feature data set, tax lot feature data set, various annotations. We built tools against those feature classes, like a locate features tool where it allows us to search for a map number in a tax lot. We can assign, do tax lot assignments similar to what we can do in Pro now. And we also developed map production tools with Python that mass produces or our maps. And what's the driving feature class behind this is our map index. So we have a map index that defines the boundary of each of our maps, and that map index has our map number, it has our ORMAP number, and ours a map scale. And like the parcels will pull data from the map index. That information, again, is the map number and the map scale. The map index drives the assessor maps. It allows us to dynamically create maps, assign definition queries, and and then we have our annotation. Our annotation again pulls information from the map index, and then we have cartography in the sense of cartographic features. Those cartographic features would be like land hooks, bearing and distance arrows, historical lines. So when a feature is added to a map, the ORMAP tool will do a spatial query and pull up the map scale and map number and assign it to the appropriate attributes in those cartographic features. Now, when dealing with Arcade, which we found replicates a lot of the ORMAP tool functionality, it's important to do some pseudo expressions like pseudocode, is to identify what you're trying to do, what, in this case, a lot of it's I'm copying a feature or attributes one feature to another feature. So we're copying the map number from the map index to the tax parcels. We're copying the ORMAP number from the map index to the tax parcels. We're concatenating the map number and the tax lot number when there's an update. We concatenate and repeat the process with the ORMAP number. So to put this into perspective, exactly what I'm talking about, this is Clackamas County's map and tax lot structure. Map and tax lot is a geocoding mechanism to identify where a parcel is located. So you have the map. We have like 21E, 21E08, 21E08A, 21E08AA. I won't go into exact details of what that looks like. And then we have our tax lot number, and then we concatenate the two to create our map and tax lot number, or our unique geocoding mechanism to identify where the parcel is in the county. And then the ORMAP structure is similar. This is a unique state identifier. Every single parcel has an ORMAP tax lot number and an ORMAP number. It breaks things out in county, township, section, range, and so on. So these are fields that I have to auto-populate or capture so I can guarantee the data quality of data quality, or I'm sorry, capture. I have to capture this to ensure data quality, to make sure the maps operate correctly, and to make sure the databases and our legacy tools function correctly. So before we get into code, I'm going to talk about these two functions. It's called isEmpty and not isEmpty. This was touched on earlier. You'll see a lot of the code examples I am going to be using. Use isEmpty or is not empty or not isEmpty. And when dealing with the parcel fabric, when you're dealing with seeds, if you do not have these checks in place, it will fail. So, and then I know I'm rushing this real quick because I want to get into some code, some expressions. So here's an example of an expression, and this is where I am actually pulling the map number from the map index and assigning it to our tax lot. And I'm going to go through this. I've set this trigger to insert or update. A data store. This is the data, it's like an object that identifies all the data that's within your map. You'll have a choice when you're looking at this to do like data store or to do map, like $map. Don't use $map, use $data store. The reason why is if you do map, it goes in and looks for the layer by name. And if the user changes the layer name, the code will fail. If you use data store, unless the user goes in and changes the source of the feature service or the feature class, it won't break. $feature, like they mentioned the last Meetup, feature is like the unique object that you're interacting with in the feature class. And in this case, I took a note here is that there's two ways of doing an overlay. One's intersect and one's within. Intersect, I found that when a parcel intersects more than one map index feature, the lowest object ID is used, so you may not, or the parcel may not grab the right values. And then we go down, I'm setting my feature class map index. So you just do feature set by name, data store, the name of the feature class. And then in here, we put in all the attributes we want to bring across. In this case, I'm just bringing the map number across. And now I'm doing the intersect. So I'm going out and I'm basically creating an array where I say, okay, with the, I want my feature service or my feature to be within this feature class, and I'm going to use a centroid of the feature. This is something that JD Overton pointed out to me. Sometimes when you have a little bit of topology errors, or if you're crossing a feature boundary, it won't work. The code won't work. So if you do centroid, it uses the centroid as feature. I'm not sold on this yet. I'm still testing it. And then I'm going into the actual calculation. So I'm checking to see if the array of objects is empty. And the reason why, if it's empty, I don't want the thing to work. I actually want it to fail. And if it's empty, I don't want to add a blank field. I want to let the user know that there's a problem. So if it's not empty, it will execute the code. If it is empty, it will return a value error, which means that the map number field will get populated with error. Now, up here in the code, it's going to grab the first object that is in the array, make it, put it in this variable. Then I'm doing a check here. If that map number value is empty, return error, because if the map number, if I get a hit and for some reason that map number value is empty, I want to let the user know that there's a problem and they need to fix the map number and the map index. And if else, return map number. And what's nice about Arcade is as soon as it hits that return, it stops executing. The expression's over. So you don't really need to do if else in a lot of cases. It's just like if you meet the condition, return a value, and you're done. So, and here's kind of the same thing with the ORMAP number. The code here is a little looser because I'm doing the check on the map number. I really don't feel I need to do the same amount of work with the ORMAP number because of how and I'll show you this in a bit, is how I've ordered the expressions to run. And then after I've updated the map number, I'm going to create the map and tax lot number. And I do this on an update. So here, what I'm doing is I'm not actually doing an overlay. I'm doing a check. So if not empty, and this is important, I'm going to show you why this is very important. This not is empty on the feature tax slot is what I am doing is checking to see if let's put it this way, the process will fail if tax lot is empty. It will actually throw an error, and this happens when you have a seed and you grow it to a parcel. It triggers the event, and if you don't assign that tax lot value before you grow the parcel, it will fail. I will show you that here in a minute. So I go out, I get the count of the tax lot number, I get the map number, I set some empty variables. I go out and I count, or based on the length of the tax slot, I do some formatting, add some zeros, and then I return the map tax slot. And I do the same thing for the tax slot or the or tax slot number. So let's talk about code. All right. So here is the arcade expressions. They are, I hope you paid attention to how I got here, and just what's nice about arcade is you just write it out. It has this nice little IDE. It has everything colored, and you can disable, come in here and you set the triggers. You can disable or enable the tools. And I am going over here to the edit map. So this is where I've been playing, and I'm going to show you some really cool stuff here. So when I go ahead and I create a tax parcel, I'm just going to go ahead and draw this in here. You'll see when I added the parcel, it added those two numbers, and I'm going to add another one. And again, you see right away, the attributes are there. Now, if I come in here and add a tax lot number, it goes ahead and finishes the completion. So this guarantees that when a user adds a feature, that it's going to have the right values. So the user doesn't have to worry about typing in the map number and hopefully entering the value correctly, because the value is stored correctly in the map index, and the map and the attribute rule make sure these 4 fields are correctly populated. What's also nice is if I come outside of the county and into my neighbors at Washington County and try to create a parcel where there isn't a map index, it won't let me do it. The code is failing on the overlay. It's saying I'm not getting anything, so I'm not going to let you finish the parcel. Now, to show how an example, I'm going to go ahead and start out of the county, come in, and here I got a hit. So that is what's going on there. Records. Now, I mentioned earlier about is empty, is not empty. So I'm going to actually show why it's important to put those checks in place, because I'm actually going to cause an error to occur. Actually, no, wait, I'm going to step back one. No, I'm not. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go ahead, go into my records. I'm going to pick that one, make it active. I'm going to go ahead and select that parcel. Go ahead. So when I create a seed and I build a parcel, you see that it automatically throws in the map number and the OR tax lot, which is what I want. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to disable a script here. And I am going to enable my broken example. And I'm going to show why it's important to check or have the is empty check or is not empty check in place. So show active I'll go ahead and I'm going to delete. And then I'm going to create my seed. And then I'm going to hit a build and I get an error. And this is because the rule is trying to run on an array. I don't know exactly why it's doing this, but it doesn't like the fact that something's empty. On update, there's something empty and it can't complete the process. And that is why I'm going to disable that. Re-enable this. That is why I put this check in right here to make sure the tax lot field isn't empty. Because as long as that, if it's not, this is saying if this is empty, don't do anything. If it's not empty, go ahead and execute the expression. So let's go ahead and delete that. Go ahead, create seeds, do a build, and it executes. So when programming against the parcel fabric, when you're dealing with a lot of events triggering, it's important to put in checks. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself dealing with errors. Now, there's another advantage to the attribute rules, and this is something I've been working on for a while, and that is constraints. Constraints lets the user know that there is an issue. So here I have a simple check. It says if the edit context is update, and the map number is error, return false. When it returns false, it says that, yeah, this isn't good. We need to throw an error. Else it returns true, which says, yeah, this is a good edit, continue on. So I'm going to come out here. I'm going to quickly create a sample map index. I'm going to do a sample parcel, and look, it throws an error. It is saying you've got a problem, and that's because we have some fields here that are error. And this will allow the users or in the assessor's office or cartographers to know that they need to go fix that map number, or they need to find out why the data is blank or empty. So we can use constraints to communicate with our users that there's a problem. Now, this is also something that's really cool with attribute rules, and is that you can also modify features or edit geometry. And my colleagues at Polk County have been playing with this to try to automate some of our cartographic features. I've played with this for a little bit. And what this allows me to do, is add, nothing happened, which is what I expected. I'll come in here. And where are you? Design, attribute rules. And here we have some code that actually manipulates a feature. So, you get into the geometry. I'm updating, if you look over on the rule, I'm updating the shape field.
It looks, John, like the rule is disabled. This is why it didn't fire up.
Yeah, that was planned.
Okay.
So every error in this presentation is planned, Amir. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking with it. So this is some geometry I was playing around with, and I've got a really good example here, which is this one. What this example does, and this could be a good April Fool's joke for all you analysts out there, is whenever a feature is created, what it does is on the last point on the X coordinate, it adds 1,000 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and enable this. Nope. Come back to my edit map. I'm going to go ahead, come in and create a feature. And it changed the feature.
That's nasty, John.
Yeah, so it's just an example of experimenting with the attribute rules and geometry. One of the, let's go ahead and disable this one. And this says make land hook. It really isn't making a land hook. This one is actually adding a point, a certain percentage along the line. So if I come in, add my line here. Oh, gotta turn off. Okay. So what this does is it adds, it moves a point. And what I was doing here is trying to experiment with doing leader lines, where sometimes we have put a tax lot number value up here, but we have a line pointing down to a parcel. So it's something I've been playing with. And that's possible. One of my colleagues in Washington County, which is just to the west of us, a guy's named Ben Lee, he's actually created an attribute rule. When a polygon's created, it automatically creates a corresponding label point in in a point file, and they use this point file for putting their map or their tax lot numbers on the parcels. So, and he found a really good article on that. And I was thinking to myself, well, that'd be a really cool concept, is if I could take that code and say, okay, whenever I added a piece of, or I added a new parcel, it would automatically add a piece of annotation. Well, I couldn't get that to work. And one of the things that I'm going to into this example is the attribute rules are great. They work most of the time, but there are times where you'll run into a roadblock. And in this case, what I want to do is I want to be able to add a tax lot or a tax lot number. I'll zoom into a tax lot number here. This number right here, and that number is stored in the tax lot feature class. So what I want to be able to do is when I add a piece of annotation, I want to do that overlay attribute rule, and I want to update the text string to equal the tax lot. So I'm going to, let's see, come in and I'm going to down to my tax lot number here, design, attribute rules, and you'll see I have, again, familiar code here. I'm saying going out, grab the tax slot. I'm going to do an intersect, which says, okay, my anything within the feature that I'm creating is within this feature. I'm returning it, or this feature class, I'm returning the first feature it intersected with, and now I'm returning that value. So you think, well, very simple, cut and dry. I didn't put any checks in it, but this should work. So I come over here to edit map. I'll go ahead and I'm going to actually try creating that tax lot number. Come on, you can do it. This is what happens when you don't have the appropriate video card or processing unit in a piece of hardware. It sometimes takes a while to think. Well, while it's thinking and possibly debating on crashing, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation. So some considerations that I take into account when using attributes is deciding, does the user need the ability to disable the rules? Sometimes in our current workflows, we have the ability to turn off our auto attribution for the ORMAP tools in case a user is doing a quality edit and may not need those attributes to automatically update, or doesn't want to change any attributes. Well, if you have a user that says, oh, I need to be able to turn that attribute rule off, the attribute rule is not going to be the best solution. It happens. The attribute rule should be be in a situation whenever a certain trigger happens, the expression runs. And if that's not going to be the case, you probably should be looking at another solution, either writing a .NET solution or using tasks. Tasks can also auto attribute features. I'm looking at tasks to attribute our cartographic features because I don't necessarily want to be constrained by how the attribute rules work with the intersection and with within. The other is to take into account, are you running this on an enterprise solution or in or enterprise database or in a file geodatabases? Enterprise is a little bit more restrictive. The data owner is the one who's responsible for applying the rules. As my colleague to the north in Multnomah County pointed out to the ORMAP group, file geodatabases, you get a little bit more flexibility because anybody can go in, anybody who's using a file database can go in and change the attribute rules. And the other thing to be aware of is that in order for attributes to work, you need to have GUIDs. So let's see if Pro is working again. And it actually looks like I've lost connection to my virtual machine or my machine. So no, I still have it. It froze. So I'm not going to show the tax lot number example. So I'm going to close by this. A lot of what I've learned has been from my colleagues. So with ORMAP, we have it's kind of like a loose conglomeration of counties. I'm working with people from Multnomah County, Washington County, Deschutes County, Polk County, and Harney County, and I'm working with people from the state. The advantages of working in a group like this is, one is sharing of ideas. Creating a development community where we can pass information back and forth. Two, instead of having one developer in each organization trying to recreate the workflows 36 times, we have 8 to 9 people working together to create the workflows once for 36 counties. Actually, I think it's 34 because 2 use Intergraph. The other advantage of creating a common data model and a common set of tools is it's easier to maintain in the sense that if one person at an organization leaves and a new person comes in, the new person actually has a team in other counties that they can use as a resource. Like, how does this work? And there's somebody there. So, and with that, I would like to thank you for your time. And I open the floor. Would this be a good time for questions, Amir?
Sure. There's some questions that came, I think, through the chat box. Maybe you can have a look.
Okay, let me take a look.
We move to the next presentation and answer those.
I'm not seeing the questions.
We can recap afterwards.
Yeah, we can do that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
So I think that thank you, John, for presentation and showing us the experimenting, I guess, phase of how you think to implement attribute rules. That was mostly, it looks like some of those things actually we're going to learn how to do today with everybody with the sample data. And to keep on time, I think now we are going to pass it to Christine that would show what
thanks. I just how do I share my screen?
There's a share button. There's a sharing on that
Oh yes,
UI.
let me get the share screen.
I can change to make it here.
Monitor.
Oh, it's because I know. It's because, Christine, you are not a presenter. You are same. Oh,
John,
I can see your screen.
I was able to.
You can see it?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Teamwork.
Okay, thank you. So this presentation is going to be a little more high level than the one you saw with John. That was a great dive in, but I'm just going to do a little more of a high level presentation. And this can be useful for those who are brand new. So just to explain to you what type of attributes you were seeing John do and looking at the expressions a little more closely. And to do that, we'll just look at the attribute rules that come with the parcel. I have presented this before and we have heard this before, but there are two attribute rules that get created by default in 2.7 when you upgrade 2.7 for the parcel fabric, and they are created on the parcel fabric feature classes. To view attribute rules on any feature class, you just right-click the feature class, go to design and say attribute rules to see what attribute rule is available. So we automatically see this must have a record attribute rule. This rule is new in 2.7 and it replaces the must have a record parcel rule. This rule is a validation type attribute rule. A lot of the attribute rules you saw John presenting was a calculation type attribute rule. So what is the difference? A calculation type attribute rule works on fields. It populates values in fields. Whereas a validation type attribute rule, these rules must be evaluated in the error inspector. And you have an expression, and if the expression is violated or the expression returns false, it will show as an error in the error inspector. So let's look at this simple expression here for must have a record. We're going to return. So we have the return, and that's going to return either true or false, yes or no. That's the same thing. And we have the feature, which is it's going feature by feature. That's for the feature class that it's on. And it's going to look at the created by record field. And it wants to see that the created by record field is not empty. So we have is empty with an exclamation sign in front of it, and that means not. So you did see a lot of that in John's presentation. Is empty with an exclamation sign in front of it means that that field must not be empty. So just like a quick dive in to see what that is. So then it's going to return, is this statement true or false? If the statement returns false, it'll be shown as an error in the error inspector when you evaluate this rule. So that's how a validation rule works. So now let's switch to the other attribute rule that comes with the parcel fabric, and it is created on the points table. And this now is a calculation type attribute rule. This attribute rule populates a field, and that calculation or population of that field is triggered with some kind of edit event. This rule populates the preserve field on the points feature class, and it's triggered on an insert, meaning new points are inserted, or updated, meaning you go and update an existing point feature. This is when this attribute rule is triggered. To understand it more, let's just open the attribute table so we can see the preserve field that it's working with. The preserve field takes either yes or no values. So when this, obviously this attribute rule must only put in yes or no to this field because that's all it can take. Let's quickly, what does the preserve field do? If preserve is set to yes, that point will not be deleted when all its associated parcels are deleted. So if I switch to the map and I try and delete this parcel, if I go ahead and delete that parcel, if preserve is no on that point will get deleted because there's no other data connecting to it. However, if preserve is set to yes, that point will not be deleted. You, of course, can go and set the preserve field yourself as you see fit, but there's also an attribute rule that is going to populate that field on inserts and updates into the points feature class. So what happens when you go and edit a point feature or insert new point features, this attribute rule is triggered and it looks at the isFixed field, the X, Y, and Z fields. If the isFixed is set to 1, meaning yes, it's a fixed point, or if the X, Y, Z fields are not empty, meaning there's coordinates in them, then that preserve field is automatically set to yes. And we can just see this in, let me open the attribute field again. We can just see this in action here. This isFixed field, by the way, is aliased to fixed shape, just so we know and there's no confusion there. So if I go and I just want to find that point, just as an example, some kind of import happens on this. We import a new control point for this point, and during the import, this isFixed field changes to yes. That attribute rule gets triggered and the preserve gets set automatically to yes. So that's exactly what that attribute rule is doing. All right, so those are the two default attribute rules that are applied to the Parcel fabric. We also have a whole bunch of optional attribute rules. These attribute rules are a good idea to go ahead and import just so you can see what they're doing and how the different expressions are working, can give you an idea to write your own attribute rules. So they're available at 2.7, and to import these rules, let me just close these. We're going to import some optional attribute rules for parcel lines. Oh, okay, that's not good.
So we are using a.
I am working with the latest build, so that's probably why that happened.
Yeah, we're always using the next build, so.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's a good thing because now we can fix that before you guys get it. And we always say,
this is the latest build. So.
Yeah. And if you guys get this crash on released software, please put some comments in there and send it because we do look at those crash dumps.
We've got this on video, so I can go ahead and try to reproduce that crash.
Yep.
No, it doesn't matter. All right, it's a very small data set that I'm working with, so luckily we can just get back up and running and it doesn't matter if it crashed. All right, so let's go to lot lines. We're going to go have a look at the attribute rules. And we're going to go and import some of our optional attribute rules for this feature class. So once you have the attribute rules pane open, just go up here, import rules. And if you are on 2.7, you should be able to navigate to your installation folder, which is under Program Files, ArcGIS Pro, Resources. And there's an attribute rules folder. And the only thing there right now is Parcel Fabric. And we have attribute rules for the different parcel fabric feature classes, and I'm going to go ahead and import some attribute rules for parcel lines. So it'll bring those rules in. It will find a duplicate because the must have a record rule is in that CSV file. It's taking a bit long. Okay, so it found that duplicate, that's no problem. And it just brought in 3 rules here. If I go and check these, I can see that there are no constraint or calculation, just validation rules. So basically, these have to be evaluated in the error inspector, and the expressions for these rules are going to be returning a true or a false. So let's look at one of the more simpler ones. Boundary line must be longer than the specified length. This rule goes and looks for any lines that are smaller than the length you specify in this expression. And this rule is designed to find those tiny little lines that are most probably errors and shouldn't be there. So here we can see the minimum length. So you can, of course, edit that value for the minimum length. And then we go down to the actual expression, what it's going to return. And it's pretty simple. It uses the length function. This is the actual feature, and it gets it in meters. So it gets the length of the feature in meters. And that length that it gets must be greater than this minimum length, and that's that value over there. If it's not greater than that minimum length, it will return a false, and it will be shown in your error inspector. So the other expressions get a little more complex with some of the tolerance math being put in there, but of course you can go and have a look at that, see how it's done. Just a word of caution when you are importing our attribute rules for parcel polygons. We have a hard-coded name in there for the parcel polygon table. So what you need to do is you need to go to your parcel polygon CSV file, copy it somewhere where you can open and edit it, because you can't edit it here in the installation directory, it's read-only. And then when you open it, go to the script expression field, and you need to scroll down and find those expressions that are using parcels. That's a hard-coded name. You need to change that name to the name of your parcel polygon feature class. And the reason I bring this up, if you don't do that, it'll fail, and then the rest of these rules won't be imported. So it's just something you do need to do for the parcel polygons import. So the last thing I need to show is evaluating your validation type attribute rules. And to do that, we're going to go and evaluate for lot lines, because we brought those rules in. Before we do that, we need to add the error layers. So it's very simple to do that. You just right-click and put error layers. And those error layers are referencing these feature classes that get automatically created for you in 2.7 when you upgrade a parcel fabric or create a new parcel fabric. They automatically get created there, and they are there for attribute rule validation. So we have our error layers in the map, and then I'm going to go ahead and bring up the error inspector. I'm not going to validate the topology. I'm going to do an attribute rule validation. Now, even though I brought in attribute rules for parcel lines and I right-clicked on the parcel lines and said add error layers, when you do evaluation, it's actually going to evaluate attribute rules for all the feature classes that are loaded in the map. So batch calculation also gets done when you evaluate attribute rules. So visible extent is fine. Then I'm going to go ahead and run that. So this is going to evaluate your validation attribute rules and if you have to do any batch calculations. I deliberately left out the record of those parcels so we can see how that validation, those errors immediately show up in your error inspector. And here we have a few lines that are too short. They didn't meet, that expression failed. The line must be longer than the minimum length. So we can zoom to those lines and see if they are possibly in error, which in this case it is. So attribute rules, great way to do quality management on your parcel fabric. It's just a matter of becoming familiar with how to work with Arcade to return true or false, or to populate your different attribute fields. So with that, maybe we can go to Amir and he can show some more examples.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks, John, for setting the stage. I'm going to try to make myself a presenter and now share my screen. Share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you all have the ArcGIS Pro project open. And based on the feedback we got from you in the last times, this session is also going to be more interactive. So I guess first question is, can you see the screen?
We can.
Okay. And Amy and Jason, if you have some time, that'd be great to use you as guinea pigs. So this time the target audience is for everybody that already got started with Arcade and you did it in the last session and you want to further understand about attribute rules. You need a web browser, you need Pro. Hopefully you download that link. If not, like Amy said in the beginning, it's in the chat box and everything is recorded and all the, if you get behind some of those exercises, again, we'll provide the cheat sheet. So here's a warm-up exercise, everybody. So parcel name, which is sometimes called APN or PIN or however you call it, must be 9 characters long for the data set that you got. Or it could be also called RW. I guess that's right away. To make sure it stays that way and nobody enters values that are 8 characters long or 10 or other values, we need to create an attribute rule constraint rule to prevent those bad values from being entered. We need to check that the values are correct. And we also want to say that null is also okay, because sometimes when you just create a new polygon, of course, in that moment before you provided an attribute, the value will be null. So null is also a value that is okay. So as John alluded to, when you return true, that means that we will not constrain the edit. Constraint rules basically prevent the feature from being created in the database. And if you return false, you're basically telling the system to constrain the edit. It cannot be saved to the database, and the message that you enter will be provided. Now, before we jump into ArcGIS Pro and the actual data, I want to go again to that playground that we used last time. You can just Google, you shouldn't see the answer yet, so hopefully you didn't take a screenshot of that. So we are going now to the playground. And where's my playground? You can just Google ArcGIS. Here's Arcade, and there's a playground. And I'll start here. And basically, we know that the APN, and I'm going to create a variable called APN, is something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters long. So we'll just experiment here. And we want to check first, we know that it's okay to have it empty. So like you already got the message that we want to only check the values that are not empty. So you can think about it, is empty returns true if things are empty. So if we do is empty of APN, it will return right now false because APN has a value. So if we only want to use it when it's not empty, then we have to put that exclamation mark in the beginning, which means if it's not empty. And then we basically want to return, okay, there's a few ways to do it, but it, as we said, so now we're only going to check if we can. It's only when we want to check values that where if APN is not equal to RW or the count is bigger than 9. So let's just start with the count. There's a command called count, so we can do count of APN. Okay, and we can put that needs to be equal to 9 characters long. So when we do count, not county, and we can see the color change. I hope it's big enough, so I'll make it a bit bigger. So what do we do here? Returned count of APN equals to 9? If it is yes, it will return true, right? So let's just test it quickly. And sure enough, it returned true. If we mess up with this, we can test it quickly and see that it's still true because why is it? No, 7.9. So is it empty? If it's not empty, it's not empty. So it enters return count of APN equals 9. Should have returned.
Hit test again.
It came with false. Yeah. So I didn't press.
Yeah,
Test
no,
with enough.
press test. Yeah.
Thanks.
Press test. The heavy
So
mouse
we got.
click.
So we covered the 9 characters long requirement, but it's also legitimate for it to be called RW, right? So this is a good place to play around. So if we change the value and we now put APN as RW, we want to return true, but if it's also RW, so we can say if APN equals to the value RW, that's fine. Or an OR sign is this way, the count equals to 9, which we did before. So this will basically return false if those are not one of those two things. And otherwise, if it's empty, you can be explicit and return true otherwise. It's also okay. So now RW returns true. If we make this something else like RWW, you can see it returned false. So we have the business logic implemented here. And now we can take it to make a constraint rule. I actually plan to have you guys do all of this work, but I didn't give you enough time. So maybe we'll just wait a few more minutes or two to let you do that.
Got a question then for you, Amir. This is the kind of the first time I've seen the return actually providing almost like if statements within it. So you're actually saying return count if it equals 9, return true if it equals 9. Is that?
Yeah, because it's a logical operation that can return basically true or false, right? You can just say return whatever that logical operator does. So, so return is 8 bigger than 7, it will return true. So instead of, so that kind of makes it easier. Sometimes you can compress it into into one statement. Another way to do it, there's the IIF command, I think that we saw last time. So it says, here's a condition, if it meets it, return true, otherwise return false. So that's another way to kind of condense it into one liner. So
yeah, those are called if and only if.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if and only if. Yep. So in this warm-up hint that you were guys supposed to do, or maybe you're already doing right now, there's a condition, right? So we learn how to use if. There's the is empty that we've been talking about. The negative is empty, which basically means there's a value. We saw how to use the operator for or. So if it's RW or it's 9 character longs, it's fine. And then we saw also the count of some string returns a value. In string has 6 characters, so it will return 6 in this case. And I know you guys probably have more business logic for your APNs that are more complicated. We didn't check here for what characters are allowed and which one are not allowed, etc. But this is just a warm-up. So this is kind of a good way to warm up. And if you are still kind of lagging behind, this is kind of what we did in the playground. And this is what you should kind of have for this business logic. You can do it in a few other ways. So now we want to take and make that into an, after we played in the playground, let's go and put it as a constraint rule. And instead of hard coding the value for the APN variable, we can just do $feature and access the attributes field called name. So we'll populate the APN variable with feature.name. and we'll create an attribute rule. So I'll show you how to create an attribute rule, and we'll test it. So we'll go here and we can kind of copy paste this business logic, and we can go into ArcGIS Pro now, into this map, and we want to put it on our tax parcels. So we are going to right click and, as Christine showed, design attribute rules. And there's 3 tabs on the top. I'll press my mouse. I know what happened, Jason. My mouse is kind of dying, and, and there's no service desk open. Yeah, no, it's actually hiding the mechanics. So we see there's 3 different tabs here: calculation, constraint, and validation. So we don't want a calculation rule, we want a constraint rule. So we tab here and we add a new rule, and we can call it must have valid APN or something like that. And you can provide the description here. And the most important thing is we can copy paste into the expression builder here. And like Christine, I'm also using, I think I'm using today's build, no, yesterday's build. So I'm going to paste that exactly based business logic, but instead of the hard coding here of the value, we can just double click the name field, and you can see it automatically populates as $feature.name. If we want to play safe, we can be explicit, add the semicolon in the end, and let's check it if it's valid, and it is valid. If it's too small, you can use your scroll wheel with control, and you can make it bigger or smaller. So exactly the same expression. Press OK. Error number, whatever you want, an error message. So I'm not going to use April Fool's messaging, but APN name must be valid. And you can provide more explanation of what valid is so people know. And when do we want to do it? Every time you either create a new one or update existing one, and you can tag it somehow. Let's say APN. You can only save those rules when you are not having a lock on your schema, because attribute rules are actually saved as the feature class schema definition as part of the feature class. So if you're editing it, you have to either discard your edit or save your edits, but release that lock, and then you save it to your feature classes. In this case, we are saving it to the tax parcel feature class. If you guys probably should have faster performance than I do, because this is, again, a daily build that's taking longer than I would expect. Maybe I'm entering the same twilight zone that Christine has entered before. Hope not. Yeah, way too long for such a small data set and simple expression. While we wait to learn a new thing, I can show you another trick, which is called Alt-Control-M, which will open the monitor for Pro. So we'll keep it open. We'll see later what process was hanging us up. So it has been saved. And the next thing is, of course, to test it. So can zoom into an area here of parcels, and we'll see some parcel names here. And we can just select one and try to corrupt the name. So here's we selected one parcel. We can open the attribute pane, and then we can go to the name field and try to type something bad. So here's the string bad for name, and you can see that it fired the constraint rule, and it says the message APN name must be valid. So we can see how it's working well. So this is an example, and if we put a valid value, it should be able to go in. So that is, of course, with the auto apply here. If it's not on, it will just be evaluated as you apply the attribute change. So this is a warm up. So now that we have been warmed up, let's try to continue. And now we're going to start with a pop-up. And as you can see in the map, there's another layer on top called book and page. That's like the index map in Jones in Oregon. And it has two fields that we are interested in. One is called the book field, and the other one is the page field. And when we click on a parcel with the identifier, with the Explorer tool, we want to see this string come up: book number, page number, just like the label there. Don't cheat and go to the label yet. And the reason we're using pop-ups is when you create a pop-up, you get an instant gratification, you see the result immediately. And it's also sometimes good if you have a complex expression to see what is actually being returned. Basically, you're kind of in a kind of debug mode, so you can return things halfway through just by adding a return value. So what I want you to use, and I know John told you something about it, and we're gonna actually mention it soon, but if you can use the map, when you use the feature set by name, and there's a method called intersect that you might want to use, like John showed you, and to see what intersects with the book and page layer, you might want to use the geometry of the feature, and then you'll get another feature set, and you want to use the first one. And I'm not going to show you the answer yet. Maybe the only thing I can show you is how to start the pop-up. So you right-click on a layer, and you go to Configure Pop-ups, and you'll get by default all the fields. But here we want to go to Expressions and create a new expression. So it's not relying on the field. It's actually going to use a new expression. And we can call the name of the expression book page, for example. And the title will be book and page, something like that. And now I expect you to write some expression here that will provide what we see in the label if you zoom out, the book, which is the book number, and the page number from this layer by intersecting the parcel with that layer. In this case, we can see that the parcels kind of are all contained nicely, but the point that John made about using the centroid is valid if you have sometimes inaccuracies across the edges. So I'll give you some time and I'll show you the hints again. Before we spoon feed you. And for those that are going to the label expression on the other layer, it's not going to help you much because that has direct access to those fields, of course. And Jason and Amy, I'll rely on you kind of too.
Well, I was working on the first one, but this one I didn't because I didn't download the data.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure we can just move on because this is being recorded, and the good thing is that everyone can just pause it at that time right now.
Okay, so let's create it first and see how it's going to look. So what we want here is to intersect basically like John did with another layer. So the first thing we want to do is, and I'm going to make the expression builder bigger, and we create a var, and I'll make it bigger so everybody can see. We want to create some variable that points to the book and page, and we call it a feature set, which is kind of a collection of features, right? A feature set, so I just put FS to denote that. And there's different ways to getting feature set by relationship and so on, but we are going to use by name. So we can specify the name of the table or the layer that we want to use, And because it's a pop-up, it uses the profile of the map. It has the context of the map. So we can use the $map to access the layer. And the layer, as you can see here on the top left, is called just book page. So we can specify book page, that same name of the layer. And then we need to specify which fields from that layer we want to get back. So we put the square brackets, and we want the book field, and we want to get the page field. And those are the two fields we want. And then there's a true or false. By default, it's true, but do we want to see the geometry coming back? And the answer is, of course, yes, because we want to intersect against it. So we'll put true. So now we basically have a variable called book page feature set that points to this layer here. And then we want to, I'll put a small v, doesn't matter. We want to get that actual book page. So one book page is now I'm going to do first intersect. So intersects, we need to intersect the feature, the geometry of the feature with that feature set we have above. So this is a feature set. We can copy that. So we put what intersect the feature sets with the geometry of the feature that we are clicking on to pop up. So that's $feature, the geometry of $feature, right? And that will return us the intersect, but it might return multiple features. So we want to put we only are interested in the first one. There should be only one, and that should do that. And then we want to return the book and page, so we can construct basically the expression. And I'm going to make my life easy, and basically a string book plus space. And this is, we have in here one feature, book page. Dot book gives us the value of the book field. Dot page, the value of the page field. And we construct that string. Let's validate that it's fine and it's valid. And I'm going to also cheat and give you that in the chat box for everybody to enjoy. So you can just copy paste that expression from the chat box, and I'll press OK. And now we can just click on a parcel and it identifies it. And what has happened here is that because the book and page layer is turned on, it first identified the book and page layer. Well, let's turn it off or look at the bottom. And you can see here all the fields that are in that parcel, but you also see something that looks like a field, but it's not a field expression. And it gives you the book and the page number. Okay. So the only thing is, like John also mentioned, sometimes you might be clicking on a feature that doesn't have a book, a page, or the values are missing in the back. What happens then? So we have to kind of anticipate that. So what I'd like you to do now is try to modify. Let's not do the modify. Let's do it. I'll do the slide. And Jason, did you try to? You didn't have the project package downloaded, right?
That's correct. I didn't have it downloaded now.
Okay. Do you think it's enough time for everybody to kind of copy paste that expression that I put in the chat box, put it on the pop-up, and make it work for you? And you should get and see that attribute rule. It's not attribute rule. It's a pop-up expression, and this time work for you. Now, if we look at on the text parcel layers, let's close that. I open the attribute table. You can see that there's a field here called book and page. What we want to do here is to be able to, when I edit a parcel, I want to fire a rule that calculates the same value that we just created the pop-up for, but put it as a string in this field here. So I'm going to switch quickly to slides. We saw this expression. And what is important to understand is that attribute rules are stored on the feature class. They don't know if there could be 0 maps in which they are being expressed, or there could be many maps, right? They don't know how many maps, so they don't have the context of the map and the layers in which they are expressed. But they will always work regardless of how many layers and maps they are used in. Where a map is a different profile for Arcade that knows what a map is, whether it knows what a layer is, and those are in the context of one specific map. So for attribute rules, you cannot use $map, and you have to use the $data store. And the $data store does have access to the feature class, whether it's on Enterprise in SDE or whether it's in a FileDB, it has the context to the workspace. Again, the triggers that we want to create here are insert and update. And this is the next exercise. So let's turn it into an attribute rule calculation and change this, switch it from the context of being a $map to a $data store. So again, right click on the tax map. I think we have edit here. So let's first make sure we don't have a lock. Come on, my mouse. Okay. I'll save or discard edits. Discard. Yep. So we don't have a lock here. And now we can right click. I'm going to also turn afterwards my base maps because it could be internet. I'm going to design my attribute rules. Click stronger. Yep. And we're going to add a calculation rule. So add a new rule and book page as we did before. Description, book and page. And the field we want to do it on is the book and page field. So here it is on the bottom. And now we need to get into the Arcade expression, and it's going to be a very similar expression. So I'll make that window a bit bigger so everybody can see it. Okay. And I'll start with the top portion. So the only difference that you need to do here is there's two differences. For the feature set by name, the context is not the map, is the data store. And like John said, you can change the layer name as you want, but the feature, what you need to provide here is the actual table name, not the layer name. So be aware of that. It also knows about the book and page fields and true, so that's not difference. Then this should just work. And then another thing to take into account that we're going to do now is we're only going to calculate if the book and page field is not empty, because you might have a parcel that sits on top of an empty area for whatever reason, or the values are missing. So in this case, it's going to check that there's actually a value. We're not going to assume there's a value, and we are going to check if it's not empty, and then just return exactly the same thing. I'm going to paste it into the chat box. So you can grab it, we can validate it. That'd be always a good idea. And press OK. And set the triggers, which are insert and update. If this was a very heavy calculation rule, we would probably put it as batch, but we don't need to do that. And we can provide tags. It's book page for now. And press save to save the attribute rule. So I'll give you all a minute to catch up. And I'm also going to pop up the monitor to see what's taking so long with this build of ArcGIS Pro 2.8. And we can see where it's hanging now. So this is part of making the sausage, checking where things take time. And it's not the fault of attribute rules. Looks like it's happening before that. So that's good to know. And now that it has been saved, and hopefully you've been able to catch up, I'll wait a bit more. The fun part is to test it. So we want to select the parcel and see it in the attribute pane. And all we need to do is trigger some kind of edit to make it react to that. So you can change the last digit of the parcel, and the book and page field should be automatically calculated. And it did it very fast, and you see the value there. So any insert, you can digitize a new parcel on top, or just trigger an update, and that value is being calculated for you. And that's very common for many cadastral systems to intersect, whether it's township, range, subsection, or whether it's other some kind of administrative boundary that constructs the parcel number. So that's very useful. Now let's go for another exercise that has potential to go wrong. So it's good that we have a parcel name, but let's also make sure that it's a unique name. And why it has the potential to go wrong? Because if you have a table that has a few million parcels, checking for uniqueness is a SQL query that can be expensive. It needs to basically check that all the other records in the database don't have that value. So this is why it can be expensive. If you have a small data set, it's going to be quick. You have a big one, handle with care. If it's a big one, you might want to defer it. But because it is what we're going to do now is a validation. No, it's not something that's going to constrain the user from editing. It's something you're going to evaluate with the error inspector when you want to. So in that sense, it's actually okay. And you're going to be waiting a bit longer potentially. Now, we want to check for uniqueness, but we only want to do it for current parcels, for those parcels that are not historic. And we also don't want to do it for all those road parcels that have RW, because if you looked at in the sample data set, you'll see many parcels with RW in them. There's like a few dozens of them. So we don't want to check for those. So we want to check only the current parcels. And what is a current parcel? What makes a parcel current is a parcel that has retired by record that is equal to null. Basically, this value is empty. And we want to create a rule to validate the parcel. So let's start with something like this. And I can basically, it's going to create a feature set of all the tax parcels. In this case, we don't need the geometry of the parcel, so we can put files, and that makes it faster because it's only bringing the attributes. And then we can have a parcel name is our feature name. So that's the current feature we are working, and we want to make sure that that feature name is unique. So I also provided the SQL query. I'm going to copy paste it actually for you in the chat box, but you can see here how a SQL query is being constructed. We want the name is the name equal parcel name, and retired by record is null. So that makes it, we want only current parcels, and we want only the name of the current feature. And two commands we're going to be using here. One is called filter. So you can give it the feature set here with a SQL query, and it will give you a subset of the data, subset of the features. So here you have all the current parcels names, and here you only get those that are actually current parcels. We don't care about the historic ones. And it's also going to return only those that have the same name. Our expectation, of course, is to only have one parcel of that name. We can then count how many parcels of that name by just using the count on the feature set, and that will tell us if our assumption is right or wrong. So to get you accelerated a bit, I'm going to give you the beginning of the expression. And I think because we are running out of time, I'm going to actually give you the whole expression. I think, okay. So you should see it coming in the text box now. And how do we create a validation rule? Again, let's start by saving or discarding our edits, so we don't have a lock on the schema. Then go to design attribute rules. And this time we're going to go all the way to the right to the validation rules. We already have one rule that Christine showed, the must have a record. And we're going to add a new rule. And this time we can say APN must be unique. And just copy paste that one here and go to the expression, and we're going to copy paste the expression that you have in the chat box. Now comes moment of truth. We're going to validate, and it's valid. Let's look what is in the expression before we just blindly test it. So we understand that the expression itself, the same name parcels are a group of parcels that answer the filter with a SQL query. And then we only want to check it if the parcel is current and if the parcel is not called RW, right? So we want to check only those that are that have a value and the retired by record is null, so they basically are current and are not called RW. And then we're going to count. And here is again what you asked, Jason. We do it in one line. So we ask, is the count equals to 1, which is what we expect, which means if there's only one parcel name like that, it's unique. So is it only 1? Return true. If there's more than 1, it will return false, and that will validate. So it's been validated, so we can press OK and save it. Oops. Rule requires error number. Sorry, let's give you an error number, 345, and an error message. Parcel name must be unique. And I'll just write something here, unique. And we can press save. And of course, there's no trigger. The trigger is a human being pressing validate, evaluate this for me. And I'm going to apologize. We're going to run a bit over time. And you can see the recording after. If you cannot make it today, apologies. We're going to put the recording and you can then catch up. So now we have this rule. Let's see if it's working. So how do we add error layers? We just right click on any layer that has attribute rules associated with it. And we can see we don't see those. Let me refresh that. Interesting. So that's a bug, because let's see that we have, again, I'll verify that we saved a validation rule. Yes, we did. There are no error tables here. Okay, so I'm going to, because I don't think you're going to experience that with release software, I'm going to save it on my side and reopen Pro with that product package. And it must be some refresh issue. If not, I'll switch to this data that has the same rule applied to it. And this gives everybody time to catch up. If you see the same problem, it's probably a bug. In release software, I don't think you'll see it. And you can see now that I can see the error layer. So that's the bug in the daily build. I think I created this project package with the release software, and I didn't have this problem. So it should be fine. And now I have the error layers. There's 4 of them, 3 for every type of geometry, plus 1 that has no geometry for rules that work on tables that have no geometry. And if we zoom in, we can actually see the parcel number. So let's first open Error Inspector. We can go to the Quality tab and press on Error Inspector. And in here, we can switch from the topology to using the error layers and just evaluate that extent. And I'm not expecting any errors, and sure enough, there's no errors. Let's corrupt some data. So in the attribute table here, I can see that this number, if we change it to 6, then it's no longer unique. So we change it to 6, and let's evaluate the rules again. And sure enough, it was caught as not unique because there's another one with the same name. So that's just a quick way to show you that. Let's save the edits with the corruption of data. So that's a quick example how to check for that. And this is the expression we used. And if you don't use the RW, you have many more errors for all the right-of-ways. So the nice thing about ArcGIS, you can put your specific business logic to meet your requirements, right? It's flexible. You can put all your condition. This came from another user. I don't know how useful it is, but it's kind of nice. I'm just gonna copy paste it for you, basically. But it's more the principle here that is important. Can I create a pop-up that goes to the historic parcels and brings all the parcels, all the parent parcels for a given parcel, right? So basically, if we go over the script, what does it do? So what is the record ID? It is the feature created by record. So this gives you the global ID of the active record that created a given parcel that you are going to click on. The SQL is we are looking for parcels that have retired by record that equals to that record ID. So we're constructing the SQL query to find all the parcels that have that record ID retired by. Now the historical parcels, we can get to them with feature set by name. We use the map. In this case, the layer is called historic tags. We're only interested in the name of those, and we don't need the geometry. We are not relying here in geometry. We're relying on the attribution. Now, the parent parcels basically give me all the historic parcels, only the subset that have the retired by record equals to that record ID. So this gives you all the parent ID. This will give you the count of how many parent parcels exist. If it's a merge, we expect 1. If it's a merge, we expect more than 1. If it's a split of 1 parcel, we expect 1, of course. And then if it's not 0, if it returns 0, for example, that parcels it does not have legacy parent parcels, we return no parent parcel found. Otherwise, we can format a message that says the number of parcels or the count plus parent parcels are equal to so and so. And here we can loop through that historical parcels and concat the names of those parent parcels. So we basically initialize the parent parcel variable here, names, that's the initial string, and then we just keep appending to that all the names of the parcels, and then we return it. So I'll copy paste that expression, and we'll just do a quick merge somewhere and see how it works. I think there might be even a bookmark in the data that has a parcel that has been merged. So let me check that if there is. a bookmark. Yeah, merged parcels. So there are parcels here that have been merged. I guess it's those two. And we're going to configure a pop-up. And you can understand, of course, that if you create the business logic in a pop-up, you can also make it an attribute rule calculation if you needed to. So let's go to configuration of a pop-up and expression, and a new one, which we can call parent parcels. And we're going to copy paste the expression here and validate it. I don't need to explain because we went over that. And let's see if it works. So I click on a parcel, a small parcel here, and no parent parcels found. If I click on this one, we can see 2 parent parcels found, and it gives me the historic names of those parent parcels. And sure enough, if we turn the historic layer on, we'll see those 2 historic parcels in the background. The nice thing about this expression is that if there were multiple transactions that happen in this location, so more than, let's say those 2 parcels got created by splitting another parcel, we only get the direct parent parcels. We don't get the grandparents, so to speak, of the parcels, because we are using the actual record IDs. So that was nice. So let me know if it's useful or not, or you want to make it more useful somehow. That also be good for us to know. That was kind of playing around with Arcade. So another requirement we're starting to experiment is, and I think this is shipped with the software in 2.7, is let's use, because we have access to the geometry through attribute rules, let's check for overlaps. So this is was the initial expression to, and by the way, when you create a pop-up now, you might want to use data store, because if you use a pop-up with data store, you can easily transfer that to an attribute rule. So you can also use data store within a map. That's for a pop-up, so that's fine. But when we shipped the software, we wanted to make a setting area that would make it easier for you to change the table name, as Christine pointed out. So we put a variable on the top, here, in this case tags, and you can just, that goes here. But we found out that this is illegal. You actually have to update the value in the feature set by name because of how it was implemented. So make note of that. Just change the value directly here. Don't substitute with a variable. And what this expression does, basically, it looks for all the parcels that are current, again, only the non-historic one. So we, again, use the same SQL retired by record IDs now. We filter all the parcels in the table to only give us the current parcels. So that takes care of that. And then if the feature we are working against, so it could be that the feature we are evaluating is historic, right? So we want to check that the current feature, that feature we're working with, is current. So we make sure that the retired by record is empty. And then just tell me if it's the number of parcels have to be smaller than 1, the overlapping, because if it's 1 or more, that means there's an overlap. So we can do it in 1 line. Tell me the count of the overlaps of the current parcels with the current feature. And that lets me know if there's any overlaps very easily. We are now busy trying to do the same for gaps. Gaps are more complicated because some gaps, like a road sometimes for some jurisdictions, is a valid gap. So we need to have some must not have gaps within a certain tolerance. So have some dimension in that, and we are working on that, and we hope to have that. But that is shipped to you with the software, so I'm just going to move forward. Another one that is easy is when you have a version environment, you probably don't want people to be editing the default version. The default version does not have undo and redo stack for one reason, and it's something that once you perform an edit where you don't have basically an undo capability, where if you do a mistake in a version, you can delete the version and nothing happened, so to speak, and you can undo your edit. So preventing people from editing default is a good thing. But people need to be able to reconcile and post to that version, therefore it needs to be public. So one option you can think about with a new method that came out in 2.7, and there's a link in the slides that I'm going to share to the function reference, called GDB version. So you can basically check the version that the feature is using by using that and ask, is it using SDE.default? And so you can see we want to return false if it's using that version. So you can either do some, so basically we use the exclamation mark to reverse the direction, and it will, if you use this as a constraint rule, it will basically prevent anyone from doing editing on that table in the default version. So that's kind of a preventive medicine to keep people away from default. One way to do that. Another capability that came in 2.7 is the ability to micromanage, I call that. So you have access to your portal. In this case, this is the portal I'm working on, and you can get the current user by using a new method called getUser. So however you are logged in, you can get to that user, and you can get to the user's name and email and so forth. But what's more interesting and relevant potentially is which groups are you part of in your portal, right? Are you part of the editors or the surveyors or the viewers? This is the default group that comes with every organization. So you can basically get access to, you get back an array of all the groups the user participates in. And this can allow you to, and then you can ask, there's another method called includes, which will basically tells you, is this user is included in the parcel editor group? If yes, let them edit. If no, don't let them. Constrain the edit. Don't let them potentially do any edit. Or let them do the edit, but evaluate using validate and send their name to payroll to reduce their salary in the end of the month or something like that. So you can micromanage people. That's not the intention, of course. That's why I'm kind of sarcastic with that here, but it gives you access to the groups, people that have access to your editing environment, and gives you ability potentially to restrict some layers from being edited by them. Another example could be only surveyors can create new constrained high accuracy points or attribute the XYZ attributes. Just be aware that two things in Parcel Fabric, if a point moves, it updates all the parcels that are associated with that point. And if you put a constraint rule and somebody updated a point and they cannot edit a certain parcel type, let's say, the edit will fail. So be aware of that and be very cautious with constraint rule. They sound very charming, but like their name, they're going to constrain edits. And sometimes there will be cases where you want the edit to go in and later evaluate or bring additional information that will make that edit valid. So try to stay away from constraint rules if you can, unless you really know what you're doing. For example, with 2.7, we ship a rule that checks that all your edits are within a certain extent. So all the points are within extent of a bounding box that you can configure. We could have done that as a constraint rule, but we were leery, so we put it as a validation rule. You can see if it works for your organization or not. Some other notes on 2.7. Of course, 2.7 works. You can put validation rules on a file geodatabase. If some of you out there are using an enterprise 2.6 or earlier, of course, some of those exercises you couldn't do because FileGDB is not supporting validation. And another thing I saw in John's demo, another new thing is that you can create one rule, calculation rule. If you have many of them, basically every calculation rule is one cursor opening against the table, and that takes some time. in order to reduce it, the new capability now allows you to update multiple fields in one go. So if you are going to update multiple fields, you can use this to make it more efficient. A bit more complex code, but you can update both attribute fields as well as geometry in one attribute calculation rule, and then it doesn't matter which field you're pointing to. So, and there's I'm not going to play this video. You can see it in your leisure. Please stop. It's on YouTube. Dismiss this. So I'm going to move on. And we're going to move to the next one. Other notes is enterprise deployments. There's an exclude from application evaluation, which means it's going to happen on the server. For many rules, it's critical. Read more about in the help link. If you have expensive rules, like we said, think about that. Don't do that as immediate rules, which fire on insert, update, delete, but try to make them a batch rule, which means that you're going to run it at a later time. If you're in an enterprise environment, of course, add those error layers to your map before you publish, because they need to be accessible when you add the Parcel fabric to your map. If you don't publish them, there's no way to access them. So they have to be, just drag them from your client server when you connect it to your SDE to your map. It doesn't matter how they look, they just need to get published out there. Attribute rules are stored, we talked about that. And I put some links to more help documentation, to more videos on attribute rules, and more blogs that are useful. And there's a space now on GeoNet dedicated for attribute rules. So that's a good place for reading, but it's also a good place to submit questions or ideas. It's all in one place. We can share that link as well. Reading, I don't know if we did that last time. I think we did. So I don't know if we talked about it, but we are using it. And I think, Jason, now we'll turn it to you because I think we're already over time.
Yeah, we're a little over time here, but we'll go through these poll questions pretty quick. There's only 4 of them. So let's go with this first one. During this meetup, I watched and learned, but do not engage in hand-on, or do my best to practice and engage in the hands-on. So this is just to kind of gauge how everyone is doing during these kind of hands-on parts of these meetup sessions that we've been having in the past few meetups. Are you actually attempting to try to code along with the mirror, or are you just basically watching, trying to absorb the content and maybe go back and watch the video later? So, all right, so I'll go ahead and close this and share it. So it looks like the majority of you are, where'd it go? I lost
Jason, I made you the presenter.
Okay. I don't, you can.
And I can see the poll now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just not seeing it. Okay, I see what happened. Okay.
And the reason we asked this question to know how much value is there in the hands-on. People indicated that they like it, but are you really following it, or you're not following it? You just want to have it for a later time. So
yeah, because this could also gauge of how we do these in the future. Then we might not necessarily need to give everybody time to work on it and just kind of maybe pause for a few seconds and say later, if you're interested, pause here to complete the exercise. But anyway, let's go on to the next question here. Let's see. How was the level of content today? Was it too advanced, just right, or too easy, based on the people who are left, their experience with arcade and arcade expressions?
Moment of truth, drum roll.
So we're getting a lot in 2 of the categories and pretty much none in one of the others. So let's go ahead and close this up and share the results. So it looks like we had about 62% saying this was just right, and 35% thinking it was a little bit too advanced, and then just 4% saying it was too easy. So for those of you who thought it was a little advanced, we do recommend, if you hadn't watched the previous meetup regarding more information on Arcade and attribute, or not necessarily attribute rules, but just more information on how to code with Arcade. And maybe watching that and going through that, maybe it'll make this session a little bit more digestible and easier to understand. Next. Okay, this one is, do you plan to adopt attribute rules for your Parcel Fabric implementations? And we've got yes, somewhat, and no. So the attribute rules, are you planning on looking at this to maybe make pop-ups or do utilize them in utilizing the attribute rules necessarily to do validation, constraints, like you saw in Amir's demo here, being able to constrain data entry or even just validate features afterwards. We've got a unanimous decision here with 81% of everyone who is left in the meetup saying that they are going to adopt attribute rules in their Parcel Fabric implementation. And then 11% say somewhat. So there's going to be some implementation one way or another, which is great to hear. And then our final question today is a multiple, please select all that apply. This is difficult since I'm the presenter. I have a tiny little box here trying to read these things. Any attribute rule you would like to see that is not covered or shipped with the Parcel Fabric. So the answers here, we've got yes, there are attribute rules that you'd like to see that aren't covered.
It's multiple answers in this case, so you can answer.
Right.
Yeah. We're working on the must not have gaps, I guess. We want to
kind of leading the witness on this one. Putting in.
And then the intention is, the attribute rules are a model of opting into them, as Christine showed. So we know they're not going to be one fit all scenario, but if there's missing things, we'd like to know, and we can consider putting them in the next version.
Say 70% of the people in the meetup here said that the current parcels must not have gaps is definitely one that is missing that they're interested in having. And then 22% say not at this time. And then it looks like 4%, which is possibly one person or two people, have said yes, and I'll enter it in the chat. So if you're able to enter that into the chat at some point or enter into the questions, that'd be great. Or if we're going to be signing off here soon and you want to type a little bit more, please go over to our GeoNet page and type it in there too. That'll be another great place for us to see the information or see the ideas that you want for different attribute rules. For the URLs for the previous presentation, previous meetup, if you go to the meetup page, I'll get that real quick and put that into the chat because people in the questions are wanting a link to the previous meetup. Yeah, if you go into the GeoNet page, you'll see all of our, you'll see all the, what am I looking for? You'll see all the past meetup videos, and you'll be able to see them there. We upload them, but I will post this link to getting started with Arcade into the.
Yeah, and where in the same location you download the product package from. This is where you'll see the video of this session, and this is where we'll see the resources and cheat sheet that will come, the slides with the links of this meeting.
That is correct. Getting started.
What is the next? Yeah.
When is the next meetup? I was just on
that page. What is the next meetup, Jason?
The next meetup is. Let me go back to that previous page. I'm posting into the questions and answering publicly a link to our GeoNet page for that.
And Jason, maybe another thing to say, if you have good examples like John and others that are experimenting, it's a good time to just enter them in GeoNet, even if it's a question kind of /blog post, been trying this, what do you guys think? Many times you'll also get the arcade experts jump in and really help with the professional help. So it's worth doing to share the knowledge among everybody, as well as improve what you have.
Yep. So our next meetup is scheduled for Wednesday, February 3rd, same time, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. And the title of it is Migrating and Administrating Parcels with ArcGIS Pro 2.7. This is a hands-on session, a step-by-step. So sample data will be provided. So this is going to be another similar meeting where you can follow along. So just get your ArcGIS Pro ready, download the data, and you can follow along with that webinar. And once again, it will be recorded, so you can follow along at your own time at a different date. But this will be focused on migration and administrating. So almost like a tech workshop at the user conference that you can follow along with and ask questions live. It'll be fun.
And hopefully there's no inauguration plan for that date, right?
Yeah, I know, right?
I didn't check.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. We'll stop recording.